Order, and I will turn it over to Woodson to talk about more budget stuff.
Good evening. Tonight we are going to talk about our 5-year Capital Improvement Program, or CIP. Before we get started, I would just like to recognize Jennifer Cowdery, John Arnett, and Stuart Braden, who are members of our CIP committee, who are here with us this evening. They were to have reviewed this last week, but we didn't have a quorum for that meeting. So we just have forwarded on this program without their recommendation. So what I'd like to do this evening is just, because I know you got tired of listening to me talk last week and I got tired of talking, kind of give you an overview, just a refresher about the purpose and goals that we try to accomplish in our 5-year CIP. And then we'll walk through each of the 3 program areas, focused primarily on those projects that are included and will impact the 2019 budget. But in your packet, obviously, we had project description and project worksheets for all of the projects in the 5-year plan, which I hope you found helpful. That's something that staff has really focused on internally this year and getting those out and available, and I think will be helpful as we move forward. But then we'll ask John and Christy and others to sort of chime in on some of those other project or program areas. And please feel free to stop us at any point along the way as we go through tonight's discussion. So as I mentioned, we are looking, what we have in front of us this evening is the 2019 through 2023 CIP. And really for the last 10 or 12 years, the city has taken several steps to address really a number of infrastructure challenges that we've had. So deferred maintenance, aging facilities, lack of dedicated resources. And specifically, we've taken steps to create a number of dedicated revenue streams that are focused on that investment in our capital infrastructure. The goal there was to really preserve those, to be not only transparent, but to help communicate to the public that we had a very strong commitment to using those resources only for those specific purposes, not to be commingled with general fund revenues and used for general operating expenses. So in the last 10 or 12 years, we've implemented a stormwater utility fee. We had a transportation utility fee, which, as you know, a couple of years ago we converted to mills to replace that transportation utility fee for streets. We have a dedicated quarter-cent sales tax for streets, which will sunset in 2022, and a 3/8 cent dedicated Parks and Recreation sales tax, which will sunset in 2023. We also created a couple of drainage districts along the Rock Creek Channel, in which we assess up to 10 additional mills to help pay for improvements and maintenance of stormwater projects, both inside and outside of those specific drainage districts. So we take all of those revenue streams along with some others that come into us from the state of Kansas, whether that's the gasoline tax on the street side or a portion of the alcohol tax on the Parks and Recreation side, and build the 5-year capital improvement program focused around 3 primary areas at this point, and that is streets, stormwater, and Parks and Recreation. In the future, we may look to expand the CIP to more specifically address some of our facility needs, but at this point, our efforts have really been focused around those 3 areas, which I think the public more traditionally equates or understands to be the infrastructure drivers. So it really helps us over a multi-year planning horizon. We look at projects in the CIP because they're generally larger in scope. They often have additional outside funding sources, whether that be county CARS or county SMAC, federal grants. So the planning periods, the design periods, and the construction periods often overlap multiple budget years. So it becomes much more efficient and effective for us to consider those in a 5-year capital improvement program. But each year we consider that as a part of and adopt specifically the 2019 capital improvement plan and budgets as a part of our annual budget process. And so as we move forward, the general fund track that we talked about last week and the capital improvement track, which we'll talk about tonight, will eventually merge and become our 2019 budget. So the first program that we'll touch on this evening relates to streets. In the Direction Finder survey over the last several times that we've administered that, streets remain a very high priority. In fact, really the number one priority that residents want to see and where residents want to see attention focused. In our very short and non-statistically valid budget survey that we did a couple of weeks ago, streets were absolutely also at the top of that. So we would expect a continued emphasis on streets. So when we put together the current street maintenance program back in 2010, we were looking at a goal of trying to generate between $1.5 million and $1.7 million in local funds, city funds, to support a comprehensive street maintenance program. Currently, there are 3 revenue streams that support the city's street transportation network projects. And I say transportation network because that can also include sidewalks, bike lanes, curb and gutter, other things that help support that street network. So we have special highway funds, which is the portion of the gas tax distributed by the state, and that is about $250,000 annually. That's one that has been the subject over the last several years. There's always some trepidation that the state may, as part of their budget crises, take some of those funds back. They have not yet done that, but that's one that we always kind of follow and watch very carefully. The quarter-cent sales tax for streets, which generates approximately $575,000 annually, and then the mill levy dedicated to street maintenance. And so that's approximately the equivalent of 7 mills, or about $900,000 in the budget. If you looked at, so your packet, what we do is each year we put together kind of a cover spreadsheet that outlines revenues and expenses for each of those program areas. And the 2019 through 2023 street program, as you saw, does include negative fund balances. That is because some of the street projects that are programmed in the out years are very large in size. $4 million, $5 million, $10 million. And while we do anticipate some additional revenue streams, we are going to have to look at how we fund or finance the city's portion of that. So in the past, we have used debt when tied to very specific revenue streams or very specific projects to finance that. And so that will have to be, as we move into the out years of the street CIP, part of our conversations. As I mentioned, we do have several longer-term decisions. We continue to really evaluate both the construction standards, the what of what we want to build, and then how quickly we can accomplish that, or the when. In addition, there are a lot of variables that impact the street program over the next 5 years. Obviously, at the forefront is a decision on repayment of the transportation utility fee. The gateway development, while the city's general sales tax has been incorporated as a part of the incentive package, any special dedicated sales taxes, street or parks and recreation, are not part of that. So when our new developments come online, and should we renew a sales tax, that has the potential to add some significant dollars back into the capital improvement program. We did not show any revenue from the Gateway project in this 5-year plan, because at this point, with the renewal time frame and the opening time frame and completion of construction, you're probably only looking at about a 6-month window. But that will certainly be part of our conversation going forward. Again, then the renewal of the quarter-cent sales tax, it does expire or sunset on March 31st of 2022. We can certainly go out well in advance. There's nothing that restricts us in terms of how soon we can go back out and ask the voters for a renewal of that sales tax. Probably a little early right now, but that's certainly one of the things that I think as we go into 2019 and early 2020 will be a very prominent part of our conversation. The impact of the property tax lid on our ability to kind of capture or hold on to the property mills that are now dedicated. That's one of the challenges of converting the fee to the mill levy, is that we don't know how that will manifest itself in future years, so we have to be cognizant of that. Then our ability to procure outside funding, particularly through SMAC and STP for the Johnson Drive project, which is a large project that would be Johnson Drive from Lamar to Metcalf. And then reevaluation of the residential street maintenance program. after the Stantec inventory that we completed in 2017. So I'm going to, if you'll turn to actually the spreadsheet for the street program plan, just get a couple of other highlights, and then I'm going to ask John Belger to talk with you in a little bit more detail about the projects that are specifically programmed there. Again, if you look at the local, what we try to do is break up both the categories on the revenue and the expense side, looking at the local revenue, those things that we can primarily control, versus external revenue, those things which we have to ask for or maybe outside of our control, such as special highway funds, the CARS programs, SMAC reimbursements, and then debt proceeds, of which we're showing none in this current plan. So you can kind of see we very conservatively really don't grow the revenues in terms of the property mills or the street sales tax revenues, even though we've seen some incremental growth from the perspective of budgeting at this point. We really try to keep those relatively flat, and then we'll take advantage of any growth that we would experience going forward. So you can see the fluctuations really in revenues over the 5-year plan are really due entirely to changes in timing of CARS or other grant fund reimbursements. And particularly in 2019, you would be looking at a CARS reimbursement for the Broadmoor project, which is the $450,000 that's shown there. And the $68,000 is the Safe Route to School grant that we secured several years ago for the addition of bike lanes along Lamar. It's been a while. The federal grant processes tend to stretch out over a long period of time, so sometimes it's easy and we have to scratch our heads and say, oh, now what was that for? But the $68,000 shown in 2019 is the Safe Routes to School grant.
Do we have any potential grants pending right now that we just haven't secured yet for the next 2 years?
Not for the next 2 years. The next cycle, and John can touch on that when he talks about the Johnson Drive project, would be the STP or Surface Transportation Program funding that we would apply for the Johnson Drive project through the Mid-America Regional Council. So any questions on revenues before we turn it over to John? Okay.
I get to talk about the fun stuff, talk about spending money. As you all know, we have the Broadmoor project scheduled for next year. Some of you attended the open house for that project here a month or so ago, and we had presented the same design that we had in 2011, which included a lot of the on-street parking, the sidewalks, the walkability. After that meeting, it was very evident that a lot of the same concerns that they had back in 2011 remain. The main driver of that is parking, control of parking, being able to have parking for their customers, the way the road was set up, and things of that nature. So what we've done is we've been working with Woodson to come up with a bit of an alternative design that would kind of accomplish the things that we set out to do, but still help, not put any extra strain on the business owners. A lot of the other things that we're looking at are parking ratios. Is the parking adequate for the businesses that we have out there? Because I think that's a main source of frustration for that project. We have a meeting with Woodson on Friday to kind of come up with what I would call an alternative design. Like I said, it still focuses on kind of the same things that we wanted to accomplish with the project, but looking at some different methods of going about that, while hopefully helping out the business owners that are there now.
So once we get some potentially different options, we'll go ahead and have another open house at some point?
We may go ahead and just have another open house and say, hey, everybody come back, and here's what we had last time, here's what we have now. Does this ease the angst and help you all proceed forward and not have this be a burden on you?
John, some of the comments that were received during that potential, or that particular open hearing, were any of those incorporated into the alternative methods that Woolson's looking at?
Yes, so I mean a lot of it was trading on-street parking for what I would call private parking. These options kind of scale back that on-street parking and hopefully help maintain some of that parking that the business owners would control, and it kind of remains on their private property. The other thing that we want to make sure that we do is follow our own codes. I have a hard time being able to ask somebody else to do something when I'm building a project and not adhering to that. So there's a balance and kind of a push and pull on how we can do things given the way that area is set up. With you're kind of in between with the buildings pushed so far up to the road and maintaining that private parking, versus the on-street parking. So a lot of those things, I've got them all noted, and that's kind of going to be our focus on Friday of, okay, hey, here's what we heard, what are our options, what can we do? I've kind of drawn out an idea that I had and need to kind of see if that's doable. But, we want to maintain the walkability, sidewalks, the things are important as far as that goes. Well, I said, not causing a lot of burden on the property owners that are there, but making it to where it's looking towards the future too, and future users can use it in a fashion that would work for everybody.
Well, and it's even more challenging. John and Emily and the engineer from Woodson and I were out and spent, I don't know, almost an hour just walking that stretch last week. And there's just, every time you step onto a different parcel, there's kind of a different set of issues. And so, as John said, that balance, that this is going to be our opportunity to really touch and impact that street for probably the next 25 or 30 years. And so, where is that? Where is that appropriate balance between trying to respect the needs of the businesses that exist there now and find that? So which is why we started this conversation early this year for a project that won't get built until next year, because we knew we would have some challenges there.
So yeah, to answer your question, I think it'd be really beneficial to have another open house and start that conversation again and say, hey, we heard what you said. Here's what we've come up with. Understand, we're trying to make sure that it works for everyone while still adhering to our own policies and guidelines.
We also need to ensure that we're still within the same cost estimate.
Mm-hmm.
The costs aren't changing that drastically.
Yes.
The next thing you'll see in 2019 is designed for Fox Ridge from 51st Street all the way around to Lamar. That project will be a continuation of what we did from 56th to 51st Street. Narrowing the road, making sure that we had a path for folks to walk through there, but would also include stormwater, full depth reconstruction of the street, and try to address some of those water issues that we have down there with that section of Fox Ridge being on the hill. If you drive through there, you'll notice kind of in front of the falls, there's kind of water running out of that hill. We're looking at constructing an under-drain pipe on that side to catch that water before it makes it out in the street, because public works staff really likes in the wintertime when that ice starts growing out in the street. You have to go down there and scrape it every other day. So we're going to try to capture that water before it becomes a problem and get it underground. Also programmed in 2019 is Lamar from China Mission Parkway to Fox Ridge. That is the Safe Routes to School project. We have budgeted for curb replacement along that stretch, and have been looking at a surface treatment for that area before the striping goes down. So that's what that project would include. That kind of does it for our bigger projects for 2019, and on to our maintenance programs. First is our residential street program. As Laura alluded to, we got our updated inventory back from Stantec. They completed that work at the end of last year. I've always called it kind of a reshuffling of the deck, but after getting that information back, it kind of turned into more of a 52-car pickup versus a reshuffle. It's a lot of information that we're trying to package up and make sure that we use it the best way that we can. So tying all the different inventories that we did together, not only the pavement, but also your curb and gutter and your sidewalk issues that you have. So it's kind of been a bear. Taking that information, comparing it to the original inventory and assessment that happened back in 2007. We're trying to see how we can get that to be a little bit more apples to apples. The inventory last time was people on foot with a handheld machine, plugging in some information. This time there was a van with lasers and cameras and things like that, a lot more consistent from street to street. So trying to pull all that together and really build a program off of that has been a little time consuming. For this year, we've been kind of weighing some options that we have. One is kind of going back with a traditional program of mill and overlay and chip seal and continuing kind of as we have in the past. The other that we've talked about is kind of shaking things up a little bit and taking care of some issues that we know are kind of out there that don't get covered by your traditional street maintenance program. A lot of the complaints that we get, phone calls, report of concerns, things of that nature, are curb issues. There's a couple ADA ramp issues that we'd like to take care of. We've also talked about the sidewalks there behind Highlands that connect back to Cedar, and trying to address some of those things in kind of what I would call a catch-up, high impact project kind of year. The things that we hear a lot, the things that we see. Brent and I were talking the other day, and he said, I feel like we're really good at being able to patch asphalt or crack seal or things of that nature and get that pavement up to par. He goes, unfortunately, we don't really have the resources to efficiently replace a lot of curb. That's kind of a specialized deal. And then talking to some other cities, I know Overland Park tried to come up with their own curb maintenance crew and ended up kind of scrapping that after a few years. I was talking to Dan Miller, who was the city engineer at Overland Park, and he said, John, it was a great thing to try. Unfortunately, it's so specialized, and having the people that have the know-how and can do it every day, day in and day out. He said, we were pouring stuff that if a contractor poured it, I'd tell him to tear it out. So he goes, I didn't really see the efficiencies there. I know that Roland Park tried that last year, and after talking to Jose, he said, man, we gave it a valiant effort, but it's just not something that's efficient. So we feel like it's a benefit to have a contractor complete that work. So we're packaging that up. That's another thing that we're talking to our on-call engineers about later on this week, to come up with a package that kind of covers some of those things that are a little outside our realm, and that could really make a big impact on what the residents see happening.
John, I have a question for you. At 53rd and Riggs, if you go north of there, that is, obviously it has to be a full depth reconstruction project, and I think I read that in one of the CIP meetings.
Yep.
So what can we tell the residents that are going to happen to that road? It can't be mill and overlaid.
Right.
It can't be, I'm assuming, chip seal. So are they just going to have to, what would you suggest that I would tell somebody that lives on that street?
I'm glad you brought up 53rd and Riggs. Brett and I did a drive to town the other day when we were kind of pulling some of this stuff together and where we needed to focus our efforts on. And we drove down that street, and you drive down, and the first thing you see is an area of curb that just holds water. There's a sump pump that runs out of that
Right.
neighbor's house and just runs and runs and runs. But what it's
20%.
done is that curb settle now holds a swath of water that's 50 feet long.
Nice mosquito bit.
So that's one of the things that we would want to address with this curb replacement program. So something like that. If you go further up, closer to the dead end, there's an area of pavement
Right.
that's got heaved up by the trash truck trying to turn around. That's another prime spot of kind of the areas we would want to focus on with this kind of a program. So some of those spot areas that we know are bad, and then taking that Stantec information that we got with the curb inventory and condition and focusing on some of the areas that were rated poor, package that up and get it taken care of, you know, focus on the red lines. Once we make it through all the red lines, start getting to the yellow areas and so on and so forth. So, you know, focus on your poor ones. After you get those knocked out, move on to the fair ones and kind of address it in that sort of a fashion.
So in regards to that, do we see any action on that particular stretch of road? Like in this year or 2019? I mean, I'm just trying to think when I could.
If we move forward with that high impact project approach, it would be something that would be in the street program for this year.
Okay, great, thank you so much.
And then we're looking at contingencies on a year-by-year basis, are we not, for things like the sinkholes that we never anticipated?
Yes.
Do we have a catch-all for that?
Not so much on the street side. We have that more on the stormwater side, so we'll touch on that. We've increased our repair and maintenance fund on the stormwater side dramatically to do that. One of the things that I will just touch on here, so in 2018 we added $100,000 into the Public Works Maintenance Program. You'll see $125,000 there. And that is really designed, we think that's high, so we're getting some proposals right now, but to really take the 2007 data, the Stantec data, and all of the other information that we have on our streets and create an asset inventory for our streets so that we can put together a program that says, here's what we have, here's what it's going to cost us, and we talk a lot about trying to get to that total and complete picture. One of the things that the average PCI rating on our streets from the 2007 inventory was in the 70s. The average PCI rating on our streets in the 2017 inventory was in the 50s. And so we're really looking at street segments, looking at, why is that? What caused that decrease in that PCI score between the two inventories? So part of it is a function of time. 10 years is too long to go between inventories. So there's just natural deterioration that's going to occur over that period of time. Part of it is the fact, as John mentioned, that it was probably more subjective, the evaluation that was done in 2007, so the scores may have been a little higher. But we're looking back and going back, trying to understand, okay, on those streets that we've done some sort of treatment on since we started the street program, how did those scores compare? And so we were looking today, 2014 was the first year that we started the chip seal program. So we looked at some streets there, and there was an average decrease in PCI on those streets of about 24 points. But again, if you look and say, we inventoried that street in 2007, we didn't actually touch it with a seal treatment until 7 years later, what was that decline in score over that period of time? So we think that's, I think as we think about putting a future program together, and particularly if we have an interest in going to the community and asking for a renewal of the street sales tax, we really have to be clear about what our goal is in terms of what's our, where do we want our streets to be? When we put the 2010 program together, we said we want every street to have a PCI rating of 70 or better. But we really need to understand what that means and make sure that is that a goal, is that a reasonable goal for us? I think some of the data that we've collected since 2010 says we found all these streets that aren't suitable for mill and overlay because they require full depth reconstruction. And so that's what I think John, when he references kind of this 52 card shuffle, you do. I mean, I think we sort of felt like earlier this year we threw everything up in the air, and it's kind of starting to settle. But this asset inventory that we'd like to proceed with this year, I think will really help us focus that in the years ahead, but leaving some flexibility. We don't want to go a year without doing anything to our street network. And so I have to really commend John and Brent for looking at and thinking about those areas where they get the most complaints and where we think we can have the visible or kind of high impact where we're not, and spending the dollars wisely where we can still take advantage of that investment over the long term. So, you know, so we left $350,000, which is what we've typically spent in the seal and the mill and overlay programs. And there may be some streets. We also looked at the streets that would have been scheduled for seal treatment in 2018 and their PCI rating coming out of the Stantec inventory. And there's one that, based on that PCI rate inventory, would probably be a suitable candidate for a chip seal. So we need to go back, and there may be some spots where we do some limited sealing this year, but again, probably trying to refocus, and we'll bring that 2018 program back to you in the next couple of months. We did leave a placeholder of $300,000 a year, full depth reconstruction projects in 20. But really, we could have extended out. Looks like I dropped it off on 2023, but we know that's not, even a drop in the bucket for what we have.
So we're not going to do anything on full depth reconstruction until maybe 2020?
I don't know. I think we've got to get some answers on some of these other variables that we talked about. So if we're repaying $4 million in transportation utility fee, that's obviously going to have a big impact on our street program as well. But I think there are some things to think about packaging. If you look at the debt service line, you'll see that all of our existing street debt actually pays off in this 5-year plan. So the last street issue, which is the 2013 C, the street portion of Johnson Drive, will pay off in 2023. Now we timed that particularly with the sunset of the sales tax. And so one of the things that we'll need to think about is if we are going to tackle either full depth reconstruction projects in the residential areas or these larger projects on some of our major arterial streets, we don't want to take on debt if we don't know how we're going to pay for it. And so the timing of that renewal of a sales tax, that may be really critical to our conversations there.
Pat, on that full depth question, I think that's something that we're going to look long and hard at too when we compile this inventory and really take a look at those stores and what they mean. And then, take the geotechnical information that we have currently and look at building upon that.
Yeah.
To try
is part of that full depth reconstruction, will it involve some storm sewer replacement too? Because
you'd like to do that all at the same time.
Right, that's what I'm thinking. You got to do it at the same time.
You hate to leave a 50-year-old corrugated metal pipe under a brand new road.
Right.
So the cost estimates that we got through Overland Park and their full depth reconstruction included the replacement of stormwater.
And I mean, are we in a position where we could do 2 blocks of full depth reconstruction? Just take Riggs, for example, from 53rd to the dead end is about 2 blocks long there. And I'm sure we can find other areas similar to that need it, that have to have it. I know we can't do a major reconstruction right now, but we can just get started and show people that we're doing it. It needs to be done anyway.
Right. No, and I think that's part of, one of the other goals. So as we've looked back at where we started in 2010, overall PCI rating of 70 or better, we wanted to do projects scattered throughout each of the wards so that we could, visibly have that impact and people felt like we were investing in each of the wards and everybody's neighborhood. Right. And I think that's part of the benefit of this asset inventory, because we've had a lot of conversations internally about, can we be more efficient in terms of spending dollars with a contractor if we go in and do, several blocks in one area, and maybe we don't touch every ward every year. And so I think that's something as we reconstruct a street maintenance program going forward, that's going to be a really important conversation. So how do we stretch and maximize those dollars? How do we show residents that we're in their neighborhoods, working in their neighborhoods, investing in those neighborhoods, but that we're not spending dollars inefficiently because we're just doing one block at a time. So I think that's part of this whole, let's understand what we've got, and then we can come back with recommendations that I think make a lot more sense.
But we also, to me, need to look at the peripheral issues that may be causing the street as a problem, whether it be water pooling, septic issues, or whatever, because I don't want to spend all this money into a street and still have the same surface problems.
Right.
Well, that's something definitely to look at. You know, you take 53rd Riggs, for example. You know, you want to, if you're going to go through there and spend the money to reconstruct all that,
Right.
you know, what options do you have, say, like with that sump pump? I mean, maybe that house is sitting on a spring, and that's why the water just sits there and runs and runs and runs. Is there an option to get it tied into the storm sewer somehow, so it's not doing that overland flow and causing the curb to sink, or, you know, anything like that? So, I mean, it's always something to look at when you're looking at those things. I think at the CIP meeting, you know, when we kind of did the deal where, you know, hey, your seal treatment costs X amount, so this is how much you can do. Your mill and overlay costs X amount, so here's how much you can do. If you went to full depth something, I mean, literally a block and a half would chew up your entire budget for the street program. So it's kind of one of those, how do you balance that? And I think the intent of that $300,000 a year was to try and start a fund up, get some money in the pot, and then once you had that reserve built up, you could take that approach of, you know, hey, this area here, you know, according to the inventory, is kind of the worst sections overall. So let's go in there and let's knock this section out. You know, and the thought behind that is if you keep them all in the same section, they're not trying to hop, skip, and jump, you know, around town. So you kind of get that economies and scale benefit of kind of being all in the same area.
John and Laura, is there a timeline for as far as when the inventory or program would be ready to roll out? Or?
I mean, in my mind, I'd like to have all that stuff pulled together by November. And that way,
This year.
we have that, we can come back and say, hey, here's what we have, here's what we think, and then kind of get a jump on whatever we're going to do coming out of winter. You know, bid it early in 2019. I feel like I've kind of gotten myself a little bit behind, just kind of given all the information that's coming at me right now. But in a perfect world, I'd like to have that stuff bid in March, April at the latest, and then that way we're kind of on the list and we're off and running.
I think this is probably already on the docket, but I'd like to have some sort of community informational session about the inventory, so you know the public's on the same page as far as why there's a little pause or why there's a lapse in doing, you know, full depth reconstruction or whatever it is that people are wanting to see. Because kind of like what Pat's talking about, just people being able to see that there's heavy duty, you know, projects going on. I think it's really important. Having a 2-year pause could be concerning to some people without some opportunities for.
Yeah, and I think the most we would think would be a 1-year pause this year,
right,
as we evaluate. But you're absolutely right, and that's been part of our conversation because it's been very helpful to have a list of streets that were targeted for chip seal or mill and overlay to say when someone asks you, well, when's my street going to be done? And you can go to that list and say, well, it's not this year, but it's scheduled for that. And so we've been very sensitive to that. If we take those streets off the list for 2018, you know, what does that create? But if the you know, if the inventory, those scores, that drop in PCI rating, I think really we weren't expecting that dramatic of a decrease in that. The other thing that's I think important to highlight in this program is you'll see these UBAS treatments. John's probably going to get to those, but you know, one of the things that we committed to when putting together a comprehensive street maintenance program was to not defer the routine maintenance. So once we made that investment and we fixed our streets, we wanted to make sure we were back on an appropriate cycle. So in some respects, you can look at this and say, well, we just did, in the last several years, we've done Row, we've done Martway, we've done Johnson Drive. Yes, that's absolutely right. But if we don't come back and do those intermediate seal treatments, we're not breaking the cycle that we've been in for the last 30 or 40 years in terms of keeping up with that pavement maintenance. So that's a new piece of the puzzle that has kind of been introduced, which is a very positive thing, but it obviously then has an impact on the dollars available in your street program as well.
I think you also have to look at the availability of space and people coming in. If we have 700 to 800 people coming in the next year and a half in apartments in 3 specific areas, all in that area, those are impacting streets.
Oh, and we don't want to take all that hard work that everyone's done over the past few years and let it end up kind of back in the same position that we were in before.
Right.
I mean, we want to be proactive in making sure that we're keeping up with it, but balance the fact that we've got a lot of things to kind of get up to standard too.
Yeah, I think how smooth this will be running in 30 years once we get this.
Yeah, about the time I
Once we
retire,
get it all
I would have it all figured out.
That's great.
I'm not waiting that long.
But a couple other programs to touch on before I kind of get to the out year stuff. Our public works maintenance programs, that's something we started a few years back. The one big thing that it's done is gone through and replaced all the signs and posts in town. So your stop signs, your regulatory signs, your speed limit signs, your warning signs, and also your street ID signs. We got rid of the nasty old green view channel posts that were turning from green to brown and put new telespar posts up, and it's really nice when somebody calls and says, hey, somebody did something around that street sign and I don't quite know what it is, but man, it looks a lot better. So
They changed the name of my street.
yeah, well, I've got a couple of those too.
Not mine, but they did. I've had people call me, yeah, it used to be Maple Street, now it's Maple Drive or whatever. I'm like, well,
Yeah, so we had to go through and make sure that whatever got put up matched what the county had.
Right.
So that's
what I told them.
that's been pretty interesting too. The other thing that we use that program for is for striping. We're getting ready to put together a striping package for some areas of known concern around town. 51st and Fox Ridge, 51st and Lamar, a lot of the school zone areas, and also Nolan Johnson and Nolan Martway. That striping has kind of gone away, and we need to make sure that we get those refreshed. The last thing that we have under our maintenance programs is your bridge maintenance and administrative costs. So every other year, in odd years, we are required to do bridge inspections. We have 10 bridges in town. GBA does that for us, and then in the even years, we use those dollars to do maintenance on those bridges of things that come out of that inspection report.
Do we have the current ratings on each of them?
We do have current ratings on each one. Most of the bridges in town are ones that you wouldn't expect. They're kind of the box culverts that run underneath the streets that you don't really think of as a bridge. I'm trying to remember the exact phrasing. They're structurally deficient, which is the second to worst rating, and then there's functionally obsolete, which is you need to close that bridge. The one bridge that we have in town that's at the structurally deficient is the one at Reed's and Johnson Drive on the south side. Emily keeps parking food trucks down there. But at this time, there's nothing that, there's a couple maintenance items that we're doing this year, replacing some handrail, some things like that, but it's not a danger. The weight limits are posted at that bridge, things of that nature, so.
You know, 12 years ago, we put money into the bridge that connects Johnson and Wyandotte County, and I'm still optimistic they're gonna pay their share.
They don't owe us anything. If I give you signed paperwork that says that, you can let that go.
Yeah.
I'll show you. We found it a couple months ago because we looked into that. Seriously. I'll find it for you.
Laura, I also kind of noticed that in the spreadsheet that the ultra bonded asphalt surface, there's contributions from like Fairway and then one also from Prairie Village, and I didn't see that on the spreadsheet. I don't know if that was intentional or not.
No, it wasn't. You're right, they need to be added.
Yeah, so those UBAS treatments, which is ultra-thin bonded asphalt surface, say that 5 times fast. Kind of a technology that KDOT used to call Nova Chip. It's really caught on here the past few years. Basically what they do is come in and profile the street down, and get rid of the traffic striping and the just minor imperfections, and come back with a thin 3/8 inch overlay, which basically gives you kind of the presence of a milled street, but ultra thin. Had a lot of success with it. I know Lenexa's trying it out in residential areas where it really hasn't been used before, mainly because you kind of needed long stretches in the past to really make that successful. I know Overland Park's been using it on a lot of their thoroughfares, but I think it would be a great application to use on some of our more main roads. So as you see on the sheet, your roads, your knolls, Johnson Drives, Martways, things of that nature to keep them up. And yes, a lot of those streets, contributions from outside cities would be had with Knoll, you have Prairie Village. With Rowe, you have Fairway. Portions of Johnson Drive, you have Overland Park. So we would all participate in that, and those funds would be split up amongst how much is in either city.
So these costs are the costs for both sides?
Yes.
Yeah, so I haven't put the offsetting revenues, so I need to go back in and update this with the revenues.
The other thing that's happening with UBAS is in the past it hadn't been eligible for CARS reimbursement. CARS has discussed that, and I think we'll be approving that shortly as a CARS eligible cost, which would participate up to 50%, which is super awesome. The one thing I will say is these may be shuffled around a little bit depending on how it lines up with other cities' street programs. I've been talking to Prairie Village about Knoll. They're looking to plug that in for 2023, so we may shuffle those around a little bit just depending on kind of the participating cities and trying to line that stuff up.
And I think like on Lamar, south of Shawnee Mission Parkway, weren't we going to do some kind of joint thing with Overland Park this year?
Yes, they are.
And is that still on track, or?
They are still planning to do that. They did a lot of patching over there kind of this spring, and that section from Shawnee Mission Parkway to 67th Street is going to be chip sealed.
So that's not going to be put on pause, and that's going forward this year. Okay, very good, thank you.
Some of the other things kind of in those out years, of course, the construction of Fox Ridge, which I touched on a little bit, and then the big project on Johnson Drive, which would carry on the improvements from downtown on to the west, from Lamar all the way to Metcalf. Still kind of in the planning stages of that, and a lot of things could dictate the price of that project. SMAC eligibility, if we continue the interceptor to its fruition up at Metcalf, so that would be a SMAC eligible cost. And of course, applying for STP funds, which that cycle, they're going through the 21-22 cycle right now. The cycle for, as we have a program now for 23, we would put our application in 2020 for that funding. So kind of 3 years ahead of time. It's kind of it's a difficult process, just being able to plan that far ahead, especially when it comes to construction costs and things of that nature, so.
Well, and then potentially you have turnover on your governing bodies in that period of time. And we've certainly experienced that in terms of, you are awarded grant funds, and then when it comes time for you to actually come up with your match, you have to go through a separate process and take that back through the city councils. And so we want to be thinking about those and running the traps on those as best we can as we go through that process.
So with that, questions, comments, concerns? Thank you.
Good job, right.
Thanks.
That's it, I'm leaving.
Next is the stormwater program. It's pretty short and sweet. On the stormwater side, over the last 10 years, we've done about $30 million worth of work along the Rock Creek corridor, which is very significant. We often forget about that because it's underground or in our creeks and we don't see it or think about it every day. But we have been successful in removing about 80% of the properties that were put in the 100-year floodplain from that floodplain, which means that those property owners can continue to invest and reinvest in the community. So it's been an important investment. The stormwater utility fee has been adjusted over the last several years, primarily to cover the debt service associated with stormwater. And so we haven't had a lot of dollars available to look at or consider programming additional stormwater projects into the plan. But that's presented some ongoing challenges because we do know we have areas that still have significant issues that need to be addressed both in our primary and our secondary stormwater systems. So if we look at the spreadsheet for stormwater, on the revenue side, we really have three drivers on the stormwater side. The first is the stormwater utility fee, and that stormwater utility fee is currently set at $28 per ERU per month. So an ERU is an equivalent residential unit, which is equal to 2,600 square feet of impervious surface. And so every single family residential property in the city of Mission is assigned one ERU. So every single family property knows what they pay in a stormwater utility fee annually. And the council does set and adopt the solid waste and the stormwater utility fees as a part of your annual budget process. For commercial properties, what we do is we actually sort of go in and map or draw rooftops, paved surfaces, and we come up with a total square footage of impervious surface that's contributing to runoff from a particular property, and then that's converted into the equivalent residential units. And so that's how the stormwater utility fees are assessed to all of the properties each year in Mission. So we provide a spreadsheet, the county sends us a spreadsheet and we provide one back. And so if a property changes, if a property owner were to look at a method of paving or parking lot surface that maybe was impervious or had pervious surface versus impervious, there could be some adjustments made to that. But it's really fairly straightforward calculation. We assess those annually to each parcel, and that generates, stormwater utility fees right now generate about $2.5 million each year. The drainage districts, as I mentioned, we have Rock Creek Drainage District number 1, which is exclusively the gateway site, and then Rock Creek Drainage District number 2, which picks up at Roland Drive and runs all the way up through Lamar, and essentially covers all of those properties that are in that drainage district. Those drainage districts currently generate about $85,000 a year, so not much. That's primarily because there's nothing built that has significant value at the gateway site at this point. So as development occurs there, those drainage district revenues will increase. And then for the 2019 to 2023 program, you will see that we have actually included a special assessment that is due on the gateway property. Something that we've talked about for the last several years. As you know, the $12 million that was invested in stormwater improvements on that site was converted a couple of years ago to a special assessment to the tune of about $600,000 a year on that property. The developer is delinquent on those taxes and that special assessment, but as we talked about last week, has indicated that they expect to bring those payments current late July, early August. So we have shown that and reflected that in the stormwater program plan for 2019 through 2023. And so you'll see in 2018 we're actually showing a revenue of just shy of $1.5 million and then $600,000 a year. And just very quickly, you don't even have to go to the bottom line to just understand that that creates some flexibility that we haven't had in a very, very, very long time to talk about stormwater projects. The one project that we have specifically programmed in this 5-year plan is the Rock Creek Channel project from behind Mission Bowl down to Roland Drive. That was on the SMAC approved list for projects in 2019, but at the bottom of the list, and I don't think we won't be till next week. I'm looking for John. Next week that we have the actual SMAC meeting where they finally fund all of the projects for 2019, but we do not expect for that project to receive SMAC funding in 2019. It will stay on the list and just sort of roll over, but as such, we have moved that into design in 2019 and construction in 2020. We increased the repair and maintenance fund to deal specifically with those issues that Debbie just referenced, the sinkholes that are tending to sneak up on us each year and require a significant investment for repair. So we increased that from about $50,000 a year to $250,000 a year. That may be too much, but again, gives us some flexibility to look at some other projects. And then you will see in 19, you'll see an increase in the miscellaneous engineering budget. And again, that is one of the things that SMAC has started a conversation around just really in the last probably 30 days, is an asset inventory of our stormwater systems. And John's been participating in some conversations about how we as a community can invest in upgrading. Our last stormwater asset or inventory was completed in 2005, and while I think we have some good data there in terms of location, what we don't have is as accurate information on condition of those structures, which again is going to be really important. So we've included about $100,000 to look at how we complete that asset inventory on the stormwater side as well. And then you really see that the lion's share of the expenses out of the stormwater program plan continue to be along debt service and loan repayment. And that's how much of the debt, the $30 million, was financed. You can see that stormwater debt overall really doesn't retire until about 2029. There were several issues that were restructured over the last several years to create kind of a level payment so that we wouldn't have to have big peaks and valleys in the stormwater utility fee. One of the things that we haven't factored in to this stormwater program plan, and that we will go back and look at if the gateway assessment is coming in, would be a refinancing of debt. There may be refinancing opportunities and early call provisions in some of these debt issues that we may want to explore in that case. But our first step was getting the assessment plugged into the budget. The next step will be if we actually collect that, then I think we have some continued conversation around that. Any questions on the stormwater program plan? Okay. Then we move into Parks and Recreation. And I'll kind of give a quick overview, and then we'll let Christy talk specifically about projects in 19 and beyond. So our Parks and Recreation program plan really addresses capital infrastructure needs at the outdoor pool, the community center, and then really in all 8 of our outdoor parks and the trails. So the program on the Parks and Recreation side is funded primarily with the 3/8 cent sales tax for Parks and Recreation, which generates about $875,000 annually. And that can be spent on capital items. It can be spent on operating expenses as well. First couple of years of that sales tax, the council did dedicate a portion of that to operating expenses, and then really turned their focus more towards trying to get caught up on the capital expenditure side. So, and then we have, again, about $75,000 a year in special Parks and Recreation funds, which is a third of the alcohol tax that comes to the City of Mission, that must be dedicated to Parks and Recreation programs. So when we look at debt service on the outdoor pool, it takes about 60% of the sales tax revenues that are currently generated. Maintenance and upkeep at the community center continues to really demand significant resources as well. The community center will be 20 years old next year, and we are in a constant battle against aging and deferred maintenance in that building. The remaining funds that we've had, we try to constantly evaluate and prioritize and look at how we can implement recommendations that are outlined in the Parks and Recreation master plan. So you don't see a lot in this plan that you can tie maybe directly back to some of those recommendations. That will get more refined as each year passes, and we get a better sense of what the needs of the community center are. The Parks and Recreation program does and has included expense line items that were identified as facility reserve funds at both the community center and the outdoor aquatic center. Something that, again, similar to getting our streets and keeping our streets on routine maintenance programs, we talked about building facility and reserve funds. What we're finding at the community center is we set that aside and we're spending it every year to catch up with the deferred maintenance needs. So we leave it in there as a line item because it's important and we don't want to lose that as a part of our conversation. But the systems, particularly the HVAC and mechanical systems, are really just giving us a run for our money. The 2019 through 2023 Parks and Recreation Plan does have a positive fund balance through the end of 2022. The negative fund balance that starts to appear in 2023 can be attributed to the expiration of the sales tax, again in March of that year, and a number of significant items. So that's what's primarily creating the negative fund balance, but there are a number of significant projects which are not included in this 5-year plan. Last year, when we put the CIP together, we suggested that we allocate up to about $20,000 to do a study, a very comprehensive study, to look at how we replace those HVAC and mechanical systems, including funding mechanisms. We've been meeting over the last month, and in fact have a meeting next Monday again with a firm who I think has given us some really good preliminary information on what we need to look at, both in terms of the systems, energy audits, and a whole variety of other things. And we would look at releasing an RFQ for that project here before the end of the summer. We have projected that the sales tax is going to remain strong over the next 5 years, but again, we are at that point in the funding cycle and the renewal cycle where, as we look to put together future programs, we need to be cognizant of the fact that the sales tax is currently set to expire.
Laura, are you getting feedback from the Sustainability Commission relative to any energy efficiencies we're experiencing from this building, or from the Works, or the community center, where they're gathering, doing an inventory of where we may have some savings on energy efficiency?
Do you want to answer that?
I wouldn't call it feedback. I would call it interest in exploring the options and the alternatives and the improvements that we can make in those areas.
Yeah, I don't think the members of the commission have the expertise to be able to conduct the studies, but they certainly have an interest in pushing and encouraging the city to look at those options at all of our facilities. So.
Hey Laura, I just have a question on the sales tax. You know, a lot of the people in the legislature are talking about pulling back sales taxes on groceries, and I suspect we have probably a pretty high revenue stream from groceries, you know, because we tax it as well for the special taxes as well as 1%. Do you see anything in the legislature taking that away from us if they do roll back on the groceries?
I mean, obviously, we would take a hit for a portion of that. What I didn't bring, I think I had the sheet. So as Christy gets up and talks about some of her projects, I'll go get the sheet from the back of the CAFR that talked about our sales tax collections in some of those historical categories. And one of the things that we talked about last week is that we are fairly balanced. So while we would certainly take a hit there, I think we could kind of balance some of that, but it's always going to be an ongoing concern. I mean, the other thing there is that because we are fairly balanced and utilities and groceries and other sort of basic items contribute pretty significantly to our sales tax revenues, we also tend to we don't see a lot of swings necessarily in the recessions because people are still buying many of those items. So, but I'll go grab that sheet and we can kind of look at that. I mean, we certainly always have to be cognizant of what the legislature may take away in terms of things that they're exempting from sales tax.
Okay, great. Thank you, Laura.
So with that, I will kind of invite Christy up to walk through some of the specific projects. And I know the Parks and Recreation, if you printed it, I usually do it on an 11 by 17 piece of paper because it gets pretty tiny. But we'll walk through that, and then she'll be happy to answer any questions, and I will go get that other worksheet.
So I think as Laura mentioned, the Parks and Recreation projects are divided into the different areas between the parks, the water park, or aquatic center, and then the community center. So talk to begin with just specifically about the community center. Things that we're needing to accomplish next year, the dance floor that we use in the conference center for our different rentals and reservations and everything. That's you put it up, take it down, put it up, take it down. It does take a lot of use and use to it, and so to keep that in good order for our rentals and reservations, we will need to replace that. I think if you looked at your sheet, the carpet in the administrative area at the community center, that is original to the building. It has seen its better day, so that definitely is in need of replacement. We've talked about the flooring in the conference center, A and B, rooms A and B at the community center. And one thing that we continue to talk about is as our population changes and the users of the community center change, and we have other competition from around us, is what are we using those rooms for? And is carpet the right thing to go in there? What are we going to use the rooms for in the future? Continue to evaluate that and say, will we go back with some sort of a sport court type flooring, a rubberized flooring, a tile flooring? Will it be carpet? But we'll evaluate that and go in and replace that in rooms A and B. Part of the ongoing roof repairs that were identified in a study that was done by GBA in 2016, we will go into the second set of repairs on that. The roofers actually finished today on the current roof repairs, or the ones that were identified for this year. So I've got spare 5-gallon buckets for anybody who needs them, so just let me know. But those have all been identified and are very specific and detailed as to what will be done there. Then refurbishing the hardwood floors, the gymnasium floors, racquetball courts, and aerobics room. On an annual basis, we'll go in and we'll kind of sand down and take the current coat of urethane off there, and then we'll put that back on. So it's really just applying a new layer of polish. What we really need to do, and we're getting to a point where we need to sand that all the way down. We sand off all of the lines, come back in, restain, repaint, and then put on the new furnishing. So that has not been done at our center before, so as part of that preventative maintenance, ongoing upkeep, we need to do that. And then we will, of course, continue with our pool pack repairs. And I'm gonna do a little asterisk next to that as to maybe we'll continue. And I think, as Laura mentioned, we'll look at this energy audit, HVAC audit analysis, and maybe they will have some recommendations coming out of that that says, instead of spending money to chase a bad item, we need to improve it. So there might be some recommendation that comes out of there that may change what we do with that. And then, of course, we need to replace our seated rider scrubber. We try to do that on an ongoing basis. It just, after a while, the maintenance and repair becomes cost prohibitive. So, in outlying years, some other big ticket items coming down, like this year, the replacement of the cardio room and the weight room flooring. We'll be wanting to do the replacement of the walking track, the flooring on the walking track. Of course, our free weight equipment, just as we lease, and you see that included in there down at the bottom, we have our lease, $55,000. That's an ongoing for the cardio equipment, the treadmills and ellipticals, all which will be, the new equipment will be installed next week. But we have to continually kind of replace that to keep it in nice condition. And the last thing you want to do is have broken equipment, because if you have broken equipment, then you can't sell memberships. People don't want to come in and use the facility. So 2020 will replace the free weight equipment. 2021, the selectorized weight equipment. Another biggie we see in there in 2021 is the natatorium ceiling. Repairs will go in. We'll do a sandblast on that after a while, just with the corrosive environment and everything. Your nuts and bolts start getting rusty, and we'll need to see if any of those need to be replaced, but then just do a sandblast to it and then repaint it, do a reseal on it. So those are really the big ones. As we continue to talk about preventative maintenance, like John talks about doing on the streets for Martway, Johnson Drive, Knoll, where if you put the new ones in, you have to go back and do the preventative maintenance on that. We will do that with the parking lot, since they're at the community center, since it's new, and we want to keep that as nice as possible for as long as possible. So those are my big ones on the community center. As far as the aquatic center goes, next year we're looking to re-gel coat slide number 1. That's the orange slide, and just with exposure to the elements and then usage, then we need to go in and we do wax that at the beginning of the year, and it's just a normal car wax, automobile wax that you use. So we will wax it at the beginning of the year, and then again as needed throughout the year. But then eventually, over time, we do have to put the new gel coat on that, so we will do that. And then maintenance of the play feature. I think if anybody's been at the pool recently, it's just the calcium that builds up on those the panels. They used to be clear, you can't see through them anymore. The netting that closes off the bottom part to keep people from going under and messing with the valves, that's starting to tear and come apart. We'll need to paint some of the metal pieces in some places. So anyway, just need to keep that looking nice and in an attractive manner. So, and then as far as the parks go, you see we have some money budgeted for the replacement of the play structure in Waterworks Park. And this is one thing that the Parks, Recreation, and Tree Commission, in talking about the level 1 priorities that came out of the master plan, they said, knowing that our revenue stream will run out in 2023 and needing to send the message that these are the things that can happen if you renew the sales tax, kind of setting the stage for going back and asking for that renewal. Then they wanted to replace the equipment there. One, because we do feel like that is the play equipment that probably receives the greatest amount of use. The kids after school from Rushton, the parents that don't want to sit in line to go pick their kids up, the kids all walk down, they sit on the play equipment, and everybody picks their kids up down there. So just thought that that would probably be the best to replace, the most seen, used, and that kind of thing. So, and I will be submitting some grant applications to try to offset the costs for that, and then working with the different playground equipment providers for any sales that they might have. So.
I just got a question on the courts. You said you're going to redo those, strip them completely and redo them, but that's like the first time you've done it in 20 years?
Yes.
That's not too bad.
No, it's really not.
That's a pretty good life out of that.
Yeah, yeah, it really is.
That's it.
Is that the tennis courts just over there?
No, the tennis courts down here, those are specifically the basketball courts in the community center.
Oh.
The tennis courts down here will be resurfaced this fall.
Do we have any ping pong tables?
We do not.
I would like one.
I think we need one.
Where do you want it? Council.
Community center.
It must be a Ward 1 thing.
I get really sick.
That's right, it is a word.
You could put it in the adult lounge.
Ooh, yeah.
The other thing, Christy, just comment, you were telling me earlier today, not really related, it's more general fund item, but just kind of share with them what you've seen since, in terms of revenue since the pool opened this year.
Yes, I wish I would have brought those numbers with me, but I knew it was busy over opening weekend, and it was really crazy, and it just even, I think when I pulled up tonight to come to the meeting, it was the lowest amount of attendance that I've seen at the Aquatic Center since we opened. But I put in for the Park Recreation and Tree Commission meeting next week, kind of a comparison of each of the 5 years of the 3-day opening weekend. And the first couple years it was 3,000, 3,500, 4,000. Then 2016 and 17 it was up around the $8,000 mark. And for the 3-day opening weekend this year, it was $17,000.
Wow, good job on that new slide.
What 90-degree temperatures in May will do for you.
Yeah.
We'll take it. You know.
Yeah.
But we draw from all over the place. I ran into a family that was from over near Penn Valley.
Really?
Yeah.
Nice.
Cool.
But yeah, we are really going gangbusters over the pool this year. Okay, any other questions on Parks and Recreation? Thank you.
So really just to recap, you know, we do know that there are several variables that we've touched on that we're going to be reacting to over the next 4 to 6 months that could have some dramatic impacts on our plan. But at this point, unless we hear differently from you all, I think we would look at bringing forward, kind of tweaking, caught a few things, we'll catch, correct those in the spreadsheets, but we would look at presenting on the 11th, July 11th, when we come back with our proposed general fund budget and capital, all the capital funds, the continued dedication of revenue from this 7 mills in the general fund, property tax dedicated to streets, moving forward with the reconstruction of Broadmoor in 2019, continued funding in the amount of $350,000 to address residential street and transportation network needs to be defined, kind of along the lines as we've talked about. Continued funding for miscellaneous public works programs and bridge inspections and maintenance. We would recommend maintaining the stormwater utility fee at the $28 per ERU per month going into 2019. Again, completion of the comprehensive stormwater inventory to help plan and guide our future expenditures, and then design of the Rock Creek Channel project from the Mission Bowl floodwall to the Roland Drive, which would be a SMAC project. On the Parks and Recreation side, looking to submit a grant application to secure funding for a portion of a new play structure at Waterworks Park. And then the specific projects, gel coat treatment, leisure play, pool feature maintenance, replacing the dance floor, carpet, A&B flooring, roof repairs, hardwood floors, pool pack maintenance, and replacement of the rider scrubber at the communities. Okay. The other thing is, as you have a chance to look at the project summary sheets, if there's information we're looking to, you know, make those as helpful and as informative and as useful for all of us as we can. As we've put them together, there's some things that we're going to tweak as a staff, but if there's information, additional information that you would like to see or you think would be helpful, please let us know, because we can certainly modify these as we go forward. And these, we would anticipate putting those projects to be completed in a particular budget year, those would be incorporated in the actual budget document, and then there would likely be a separate 5-year CIP document that would have all of those years out there. So if we don't have any other questions, that's our presentation this evening. We will be back. Yes?
Do you have any estimate of person hours that it takes to put together the budget?
To put the budget together?
Half a year.
I don't know.
More
It
than
feels like an
6.
eternity sometimes, right?
Working on it for a year now.
Yeah.
A lot of, huh?
Been working on it for about a year. It's kind of staff.
It's a lot of work.
Well, we hope, we hope, and for us, the more we can improve and add to and create the history and the context, we don't feel so much like we're recreating the wheel, every year. But it's the most important thing that we do. And so I don't know, I've never counted up. I'd probably be scared to see it, right?
John,
Yes.
Very impressive.
what is the ballpark estimate of full depth reconstruction of 2 blocks of street?
Well, if we could come up with 18 million, we could do it.
2 blocks?
$500,000.
Yeah, $500,000.
Yeah, no?
I mean, if you did, the street, curb, the sidewalk, the stormwater, street lighting,
Right.
yeah, I mean, you'd be $400,000 to $500,000.
We could put a toll
You ready
booth up
to
at your
contribute?
street.
Sure, I will, but eventually it's got to get done.
Yes.
Yeah,
And I think that's something we ought to look at, putting the money up to do little bits of it right now until we're ready to go with the full
Well, I
program.
think the priorities, I think if you can come back with some sort of criteria-based decision as to what warrants
Right.
priority 1, 2, and do it by ward, maybe.
Well, and I think that's why we wanted to still continue to show that placeholder for full depth reconstruction, because whether or not we're taking $300,000 or $500,000 and actually doing a project, or whether we're saying, maybe we look at a package and maybe it's a $5 million debt issue that does full depth reconstruction, but we're not having to increase revenues to repay that debt because we're already, capturing that within the mills that we're generating, or the gas tax. So I think that's part of why we didn't just, we could have dropped that out entirely and made the bottom line look a little bit better, but I think we want to absolutely keep that on the radar screen as we figure out, you're right, we've got to do it.
Right.
The further we kick that can down the road, it's just going to get worse. And that's why I think step 1 is, let's really get,
No, I agree with
yeah,
what you're saying, but I'm just saying, you could do that and
yes,
start showing some progress by
yeah.
knocking out a street or 2.
Yep.
We'll find out what's causing it.
We've got the reserves to do it for a year or 2 without taking us below, and we got money, hopefully that'll be coming in.
Right.
So-
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, what we looked at, you still were sitting on $1 million in excess reserves in the general fund. And if the development projects go as anticipated, I think.
Big check in the mail.
Big check in the mail on the stormwater side, but, I think we were
But,
talking.
and that's why I asked about the
Yeah.
stormwater. If that's part of the full depth reconstruction, that money could be used for that.
Absolutely.
That's
You
why I
could take
brought
a portion of
up.
that to help support those. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think we ought to do it sooner than later to get it rolling. I'll let the mayor deal with it.
But the one thing we do need some certainty on is what's going to happen with the tough decision. So,
Oh, absolutely, you're right.
what's our exposure? And I think we're getting closer. So hopefully in the near future, we can get that decision decided and start making plans based on whatever comes out of it.
Yeah, I do understand that. Good, could I just see a
So-
motion to adjourn?
Yes, no, well, and just a reminder, so we'll have an executive session at 6 o'clock next Wednesday evening in advance of our city council meeting to discuss pending litigation, and then our city council meeting at 7, and then our next budget meeting will be the committee meetings will be on July 11th because of the July 4th holiday, so July 11th, where we will really come back to you with a proposed budget. So
As a reminder, I will be out of town next week. If there's a reason you want me to phone in for that meeting, I'll make sure I'm in a position somewhere where I can do it, so let me know for sure.
Could I make a comment? Just, I think the Capital Improvement Program Committee is really, really important. I think it's really a good initiative that the city has started, and applaud those who Laura and those who came up with that idea. And we've had a couple of false starts with the forum and the ability to give input, but I think it's a really good opportunity for the citizen input to the budget, and it's important, and that's why 4 of us are here tonight, I think. And so we hope to get input to you following these couple of false starts.
Yes, and Lee Loudon snuck in after I made the other introduction. She's also a member of our Capital Improvement Program Committee, and we do appreciate them. And again, it's gonna take us a while to get the process rolling, but their perspectives and their input and their feedback, as we've just introduced and talked around projects, has been very helpful for us as a staff to have more of that, real-time citizen engagement and input. So we appreciate it, absolutely.
All right, any other questions? Hearing none, we're adjourned.